5.
I don't really give a sod what they think. I want them to do their job properly.
4.
$14.99, mate, of my own money.
3.
Well, that whole light at the end of the tunnel thing is always a problem, isn't it? You never know whether it's daylight or it's a train coming.
2.
I spent a lot of my time as a young academic, when I should have been going out and forming my personality, studying these things.
1. We have liftoff.
It's blast off number 7, lock and load. Welcome again to Planet Normal, the Telegraph podcast with Alison Pearson.
Hello.
And me, Liam Halligan. So, Rishi Sunak's unveiled his big economic enchilada. The Chancellor's splashed the cash, as the British government throws caution to the wind trying to reboot our post-COVID economy. But the really pressing news is that you finally had your haircut. So how did it go, and how shocked was your hairdresser after you broke into his salon through the window with your lockdown bouffant?
Screaming with my tresses down to my knees. Well, it was a huge relief, and I think everyone was very glad. My hairdresser wasn't going to wear his mask, and I wasn't going to wear mine, because we both felt happy with that. And
Consenting adults.
I do think some of the other measures in the salon are a bit off-putting, and I think Planet Normal wants us to get back to the old normal, not the new normal, so it won't put people off. But my really big breakthrough, Liam, was that we went out to dinner last night.
No.
And apparently have to wear shoes and clothes.
What, you don't normally, or what?
Well, at home.
What kind of restaurants do you go to?
Well, I've just been wandering around at home, my flip-flops and my horrible old slippers. So actually having to squash my feet. I think my feet have splayed during lockdown. But it was lovely to get out. I have to say that on the train to London to go to the hairdresser, the last time I was on a ghost train is in Barry Island Pleasure Park in 1972. And this, Liam, was a ghost train. No, there was no one on it. And for the first time, I got the chills about the state we're in, really, because I took my mask to wear on the train, because, of course, that's now compulsory. There was no need. I had about 6 carriages to myself. Yeah. And we got off at King's Cross. All the shops at the station, normally it's thronging, you know what it's like, absolutely deserted. And the cab driver who took me to the hairdresser, he said, he's waited 2 hours on the rank for one fare. He said it's an absolute catastrophe. So I think for the first time I felt scared, that it's not opened up yet, has it? And it really needs to get going now, or we're going to be in big trouble. The government should really be saying, you've done very well. It's fine. You can come out, don't worry. But they seem to be incapable of making that admission. And why is that, do you think?
Well, the deaths are very, very much focused, the unfortunate deaths, on elderly people, on those with specific symptoms that make them more vulnerable anyway. I think the government is finding it really hard to visibly change its mind, as Mervyn King suggested that it would in the current political climate recently in Planet Normal. And I guess this is one reason the Chancellor has just delivered a mini budget. He's literally just sat down in the Commons, and we're recording this straight after. Lots of emphasis on job creation, lots of emphasis on getting the economy moving, huge focus on youth unemployment, this tsunami of unemployment that we've been discussing on the podcast. What did you think of the statement, Alison?
Well, I think, forget the magic money tree, Liam. Rishi's found a magic money forest, hasn't he? I mean, it was, money over here, money over there. Look, I've got a 20-year-old son and a 24-year-old daughter. They are absolutely in the blast area of, the generational horror that's coming down the road towards them. So I was really pleased to see him taking measures to boost the hospitality industry. My daughter frequently has casual work as a waitress.
The Eat Out to Help Out.
We get a tenner off lunch, don't we, between Mondays to Wednesdays.
That's right.
And I think, there's a bonus scheme for firms that keep furloughed workers. I suppose what I would say to you, because you're our top economist. I mean, last week Boris said in a speech, I am not a communist. Now, those are not the most reassuring words I've ever heard from a Conservative Prime Minister. But COVID is clearly shifting the Johnson government leftwards. How does this differ from socialism, Liam?
Well, I certainly would back some of the activist measures that Rishi's come out with. As you say, a big job creation scheme. He's cut stamp duty for 6 months from today on properties valued up to £500,000. He's confirmed a £2 billion job revolution quotes for younger workers, subsidising employers taking on younger workers, the so-called Kickstarter scheme, and the furlough bonus, as you said, £1,000 for firms if they bring back furloughed workers full time until January. But this all adds up to borrowing this year of £320 billion at least.
Wow.
Even if the economy recovers, that's a 15% of GDP addition to our national debt in a single year. That's far more than we borrowed in the year after the financial crisis. What's going on, Alison, is basically the government is issuing debt, so-called government gilts, and the Bank of England's buying. That's circular financing. That cannot go on forever. I don't think Sunak had a choice. He had to do something activist because we're facing high unemployment. But there will come a time, and that time will come soon, when there's going to be a huge showdown, I hope, between the government and the Bank of England, where the Bank of England says, we are simply not going to keep buying government bonds in this circular Zimbabwe economic style fashion.
How much is this the sticking plaster of state subsidies? I mean, look, I don't understand all the detail, but you've got this sort of, job creation scheme for the under 25s. All of us who've got kids that age are grateful for that. But you're going to have these side effects, aren't you? So the young unemployed get taken on at the expense of older workers, maybe lots of people our sort of age who've been made redundant, women returners. That's one of my big themes. So will employers be incentivized to take on the very young at the expense of the older and more experienced?
You've put your finger on it, Alison. There are three main problems that economists identify with these job creation schemes. And we had them all through the 60s, the 70s, another big slew of them in the 80s and 90s.
There was a work start scheme in the 90s, I remember. I
spent a lot of my time as a young academic, when I should have been going out and forming my personality, studying these things. And first thing you have is called the dead weight effect. That's where the state pays firms to take people on that they would have taken on anyway. Then you've got what you just referred to, which is called the substitution effect, where the state takes on certain kind of workers that is subsidising at the expense of other workers, and those workers tend to be older workers. Then you have the displacement effect. That's where big firms that can afford to take on more workers and then get those workers at a subsidised rate get an additional competitive advantage over the smaller firms that can't expand their workforce. So the smaller firms get hammered. And all these three things detract from the good that the government is trying to do. Look, we are already at 9-10% unemployment. Even if 2/3 of furloughed people are kept on full-time, 9 million of them in total, we're going to get up to 13, 14, 15% unemployment, as we've often said, unfortunately, on Planet Normal. The government has to be seen to be doing something, but in the end, I'm afraid, targeted job subsidy schemes, there's a long history of them not actually working all that well.
But I guess, as you say, he has to do something because it is very, very dire. The one thing I took issue with Rishi Sunak about was he said if they make their businesses safe, demand will be there and be there quickly. Now, my experience in the last few days since the easing of lockdown is that if they don't go back to the normal, not the new normal, then people will be put off. Going to the shops is an absolute nightmare. I went to get something for my daughter the other day, and it's going to 2 shops took 4 hours. So the retail hospitality are not going to recover. Now, Liam, I've got a bit of a bombshell here now.
Go for it.
Coming to the stamp duty, I have just purchased a book called Home Truths by Liam Halligan.
Who's that?
$14.99, mate, of my own money. Now, I could have
given you one for free, you fool.
I know. No, we've got to stimulate the economy. So I'm actually looking at this this stamp duty cut. This seems to me to be long overdue. The house prices in this country are absolutely ruinous, aren't they? And when I talk to my daughter, who's in her mid-20s, she says, "Mum, none of my lot can ever imagine being able to own anything." So this will do some good, will it?
This is the one move in the budget that I hope becomes permanent. Stamp duty is a tax on moving. It's a tax on people who are buying homes when they're scrambling to get every pound they possibly can together. Yeah. Anyway, it's a very distorting tax. I certainly hope that this remains a permanent fixture. He says it's going to happen until the end of March next year. That will certainly get the housing market moving. In the end, though, if they're not building enough homes, that's the message of my book, Home Truths.
Which I shall shortly be opening. So, you know.
You got to put your tea somewhere when you're on your sitting by your desk.
Review next week. Stand by, listeners. Stand by. No, I am looking for. I genuinely am, because I think that housing, that seems to be, when you look abroad, you think we make a pig's ear of it, don't we? It's so prohibitive. Englishman's home is his castle. I think so many people just want to have a home, and I think one thing I've noticed is that, particularly in a lot of young couples, they don't want to have a baby until they have a house. So that's pushing back the kind of conception time until well into their 30s, and then they end up running into fertility problems.
There's some very shocking numbers about fertility being linked to the shortage of homes. We are the nation of homeowners, yet our home ownership rate in the UK is now below the EU average.
I remember the first flat I bought, 69,500, and it seemed like an absolute king's ransom then. Well, you can't buy a shoebox for that now, can you? You
can't buy a shoebox for that. But let's move on, because I wanted to talk about your Telegraph column this week, which really hit me smack between the eyes. You didn't clap for the NHS's 72nd birthday, Alison. You have many kind things to say about NHS staff, but you're concerned about what you call Britain's coming cancer crisis.
Yeah, I don't know if you saw, there was a panorama on Monday.
I did.
Where they
good BBC work. Let's give them credit where it's due. That was a good programme.
Credit where credit's due. An excellent panorama programme on Monday where they predicted that there would be as many as 35,000 excess cancer deaths as a result of corona. Now, my reaction was, well, it's not really just as a result of the virus, is it? It's a result of the fact the health service shut down. Didn't shut down in France, didn't shut down in Germany. Over here, I don't know if you've tried to ring a GP, Liam, but you get a kind of 10-minute recorded message which explains that if you haven't got any COVID symptoms, just please go away. It's not convenient for us to see us. And I've been hearing more and more from Telegraph readers saying awful stories. I mean, really terrible stories about people in great pain and what's happened. I mean, if you think that 2 million screening appointments have not been sent out by the NHS since the 23rd of March, and that means thousands of cancers will have been missed at an early stage when the treatment is most effective. And I heard from an eminent hospital consultant. I mean, we had Carol Sikora on the programme as well. This is his theme. And this guy says, the novelty factor has made it politically unacceptable for people to die of COVID-19, but acceptable that more people die of everything else. I mean, can you imagine?
Blimey. I mean, I was really taken in the programme. I'm glad you picked up on the programme in your column. The young woman, Wendy Peake, mother of teenage daughters, tragic case. As you called, the lovely 31-year-old mum of one, Kelly Smith, whose chemotherapy was paused against her will as the lockdown began, giving an interview before she subsequently died. Incredibly poignant moment. I do think Carol Sikora was really early to this, as we featured in Planet Normal a few weeks ago. And it's also people not presenting at the NHS with symptoms or with their own concerns because they're scared of going to hospital.
Well, they have been scared. Yes, it's true. That's been a strong element of it. But then you've also had this absolute, doctors disappearing, can't be seen for love nor money. And I guess the question I want to ask is, how can it be that minimum wage supermarket workers are managing to greet their customers through perspex screens, but highly rewarded GPs can't seem to do that for their patients? And I was talking to a veteran GP and she was appalled. She said a lot of her colleagues have been lazy and absent, and all these video consultations you can have. She said they're not much use, Liam. You can't spot meningitis. You can't spot serious gynecological problems or stomach issues. So there's going to be this great tsunami of very, very seriously ill people. And I think it's another failure of the bureaucratic class, the government class, really, because senior members of the NHS, Public Health England, the government, they lost all sense of proportion and it became the National COVID Service, not the National Health Service. And they were waiting and waiting for this corona juggernaut to come in, and they threw everyone else with other illnesses under the bus. And I'm sorry, but I do absolutely admire those NHS staff who are in the front line. But this is disgraceful, and we're going to be seeing this, in the months and years ahead. This story is just going to run and run.
I agree. Another instance of this lockdown, as we've been arguing for a long time, Alison, causing more deaths unfortunately, than it actually prevents.
Hello, I'm Christopher Hope, but my pals call me Chopper, and you can too. Just dropping into my second favourite podcast to tell you about another Telegraph show, mine. As the Telegraph's chief political correspondent, I spend my days holding politicians to account and asking them about the things that affect you. I speak to top politicians from across the political spectrum, commentators with their finger on the pulse, and of course, my talented colleagues at the Telegraph. So if that sounds like your cup of tea, please search Chopper's Politics wherever you're listening to this. Cheerio!
So let's move on to our latest Planet Normal guest. So I talked to Trevor Phillips, London-born. His family's originally from what was British Guiana. Trevor's a well-known broadcaster, a former Labour London mayoral candidate, a formidable anti-racism campaigner. Now, Trevor's been really outspoken over recent weeks when it comes to Black Lives Matter and the state of UK race relations. And he says a key thing that we must always do is not confuse the UK with the United States.
The truth of the matter is that we need to separate what is happening in the United States and what is happening here in certain respects. And because I've been coming and going to the United States for the best part of 50 years, most of my family lives there. I have 4 sisters in New York, a brother in Florida, and so on. I can see what the similarities are and what the differences are. In the United States, there is a very, very deep rift between African Americans and pretty much the rest of the United States. Here, I think the situation is quite different for a number of reasons, and I'll just name 2. First of all, black people in this country are not as separated from everybody else as they are in the United States. We have the largest single group, proportionately, and possibly absolute numbers, of mixed race, black, white children anywhere in the Western world. And the only group, by the way, which has been formed not because of slavery or oppression, but by choice since the Second World War, with the Windrush generation, as we now call it, marrying into the local white population. And that's a very different kind of background. And secondly, I think that the situation with the police, though it is by no means a good one, it is not lethal in the way it is in the United States. When I go to visit my brother in Florida, I remember this so clearly from 3 years ago. I went for a run in the morning. I came back and he said, "How's the run?" I said, "It's great." He said, "How did you come back?" I told him the route I'd followed and he said, "Don't do that again." And I said, "Why?" And he said, "You ran across somebody's private property and down here we have a law called Stand Your Ground, which allows people to shoot you if you cross their property.
Crikey.
And down here, you are not Trevor Phillips, harmless Brit, former chairman of this, that and the other, newspaper writer. You're just another black guy on my property.
Yeah.
And you will get shot."
Yeah.
So it's a very, very different situation.
In recent weeks, the police have come in for a lot of criticism, haven't they? Particularly the Met. Now, where are you on this very contentious issue of stop and search? The former Surrey Police and Crime Commissioner Kevin Hurley recently pointed out, criticised for it, that in his view, stop and search is largely about stopping black on black crime. Do you think that's a valid point to make?
There is clearly a problem. And it may actually simply be a problem of perception. And when we look at the data, we will find that actually what we think is happening is not what's really happening. But the first thing is we need to deal with the problem of perception. And there clearly is a perception that's been created that people of color, and particularly black men, are more likely to be stopped, and stopped in a way that is not courteous, that is not founded in some proper crime fighting activity. And, you know, we've all been there. I mean, it does seem absurd to someone like me, when I was in my 40s and my 50s, still being stopped, and you hear them phoning in, and what they're doing is checking that you own the car that you have had for 10 years. Yeah. I mean, it's humiliating. and it's ridiculous.
Yeah.
I completely get, by the way, the tension that the police officers may feel in certain circumstances. But the truth is that this is not a sort of equal encounter. When they put on the uniform, they bear a special responsibility because they also have special powers. We have to remember we are dealing with human beings here. And it doesn't matter if you're black or white. If a police car pulls up behind you, you may be the most law-abiding citizen in the world, but none of us can escape the feeling of a slight fear.
Yeah, your stomach turns.
In that situation. And in those situations, ordinary people, do things that are not normal. And you might then say afterwards, why didn't you stop, and so on. But look, let's put ourselves in that situation.
Yeah.
In the same way as we might say, let's put ourselves in the situation of the police officer who knows that he or she may be stopping a vehicle that has weapons in it. So everybody just needs to back off and take a breath here and stop taking positions, whether they are, by the way, verbally attacking the police or, in the case of the police, being overly defensive. So the general point I want to make is that there is a problem and it has to be recognized. The second point, I have a company now that does data science, and this is the kind of thing that we study a lot. I think we need to look at the data carefully and understand what is going on more generally. Coming back to the question you asked me, there is absolutely no doubt that if you are thinking about what is the greatest danger to a young black man today in the capital, it is not the police. It is danger from somebody else in a gang, and that person is very likely to be a person of color. And I think that whilst we have to get the police to do the right thing and behave in the right way, let us not forget that young black men are dying. I mean, just dying in hundreds every year, never mind the ones who are being injured and maimed. And that is still the biggest issue for me.
You know, I find it really moving when you say that. I find it really moving because I know by saying that you are drawing criticism onto yourself. Why can't we have a conversation about black on black crime without even you, with your background, your ethnicity, your impeccable anti-race discrimination? What kind of a situation have we got ourselves into here?
Well, shall I say one thing about this, Liam, which I think nobody's going to like? This is what racism really looks like. This is what racism really looks like. The reason that it's very difficult for anybody to say this is because the voice of people for whom one single dimension of race relations, i.e. conflict, is most important, is always amplified by a media which is basically dominated by white people, and particularly a white liberal consciousness which is absolutely consumed by guilt. So almost anything to do with black people must involve them showing us, and I mean the editors of newspapers, the reporters and so on, showing us how much they care about black people. It astonishes me. It absolutely astonishes me. People who in any other circumstance report fairly, analyze properly, when it comes to issues of race, abandon all of that in order to try and persuade me, a black person, how much they care about me. The truth is, I don't care about that. I don't really give a sod what they think. I want them to do their job properly. You know, we now have a media which, for 2 or 3 weeks, absolutely lionized Black Lives Matter, the organization, rather than the idea, didn't do any of the normal reporting that it would do in what the movement constitutes, what it believes, and so on. When it comes out that some parts of the organization are essentially far left, have been hijacked by extremists, everybody suddenly drops, not just the organization. They stop reporting on the Black Lives Movement idea because actually it's all too awkward. We can't make progress that way. We've got to be honest. We've got to be generous, but we've also got to be accurate about what's going on.
You did shoot to prominence working for London Weekend Television, LWT, back in really a golden age of current affairs, long-form political interviews, hard-hitting news programmes, the sort of news programmes I grew up watching, basically, on the BBC and ITV. But now it seems our mainstream broadcasters have lost their way, because as there's been an increase in on-screen ethnic diversity, in my view, there's been a real reversal, a major reversal in cognitive diversity, socioeconomic differences between top decision makers, particularly at the BBC. I put it to you, Trevor, that if you are from a sort of inner London or inner city background as a white person that grew up in a completely multi-ethnic environment, you know a lot more about race relations than somebody who grew up in a posh village in the middle of Gloucestershire or something.
You don't have to put it to me, Liam. It's just true. And unfortunately, the additional problem is that the person who grows up in, let's say, Islington or in Harlesden, who happens to be white, is probably a bit less shy in looking at these arguments about race with a sort of clear eye and without personal guilt, because that person has grown up next to people who are black or Asian.
In and out their houses, the whole childhood.
And doesn't have to feel that they've got to demonstrate something about themselves when they're reporting on these issues. Whereas a person who has been to, one of these rather shishi schools and who has just discovered black people in their 20s or 30s and feels the need, figuratively speaking, to take the knee every time they meet a person of color, I understand how difficult it is for them. I really do. But the problem is that I haven't got time to educate those guys. What I really want is for the media to report honestly and comprehensively, and not to bleed all over me. What I want them to do is to tell me what is really going on.
I could talk to you for ages, Trevor, but I'd have to ask you, how do you think Keir Starmer's doing? And are you hopeful that you'll ever rejoin the Labour Party? It's been a huge part of your life.
Yeah.
You've obviously been suspended because of concerns about comments you've made historically about the Muslim population, apparently. Do you see light at the end of the tunnel under Keir Starmer? Could you come back into the Labour fold?
Well, that whole light at the end of the tunnel thing is always a problem, isn't it? You never know whether it's daylight or it's a train coming. The answer is that it is alleged that I made comments that was Islamophobic and racist. Part of the reason is that I drew attention to the fact that the grooming and child trafficking, effectively, scandals in some towns in England, particularly in the north, had a very definite ethnic component, and it was thought that this was unacceptable. Problem is that everybody in those Labour seats, because principally this was Labour seats, absolutely knew what was going on.
Yeah.
And it was to the detriment of the Labour Party that we appeared to be ready to be silent about what was going on. And it looked as though our party, the Labour Party, was trying to protect people who had done the most awful things. And from my point of view, the best thing for the Labour Party would be to speak honestly and openly about what had gone on. And the other allegation was that I'd written a pamphlet about 50 years of race relations, and I had mentioned Enoch Powell. Now,
how could you not mention Enoch Powell?
You asked my question exactly, Liam. I have not been able to get an answer from the party on any of these questions. The last exchange we had was at the beginning of March. Up until now, I do not know whether my suspension is going to be turned into expulsion. I have no idea what's going on. I have not had any exchange with Keir on these matters. I have a great deal of respect for the person who's now come in as the new General Secretary. And, from my point of view, look, Liam, I'm a loyal party member. I keep my gob shut. I'm not going to go around slagging off the party. All I would do is to say, Could they please just get on with it so that we can all get on with our lives? Either they throw me out or they solve this problem. Because at the moment, there is a practical issue. It means that there are some things that I cannot do because this thing is hanging over my head. It had been my hope that the firm which I built up, the data science firm I built up, which does an enormous amount of work for local authorities, for police forces, for private sector, retailers, and so on, some of which is to do with analysing the behaviours and preferences of ethnic groups. We have some technology that is unique in the world simply because we spent a long time building it up, which I think would have been extremely helpful in analysing what is happening with COVID. I am pretty sure that we would have been able to predict the outbreak in Leicester.
Wow.
But because of this particular controversy, it was thought that our technology could not be used. And at the moment, we've got the machines.
Because you've been cancelled effectively.
Essentially, yeah. So we have technology that nobody in the world has. We cannot use it to help prevent suffering and indeed death, particularly amongst people of minority backgrounds.
That's just crazy.
It's not just crazy; it's criminal. It's just criminal. And frankly, between the Labour Party and, to be honest, also some of the authorities who are too cowardly to risk getting into a row, actually, we have probably allowed some people who should not have died to die. Now, I'm not going to go on about this now, but when all of this is over, I will name some names because what has happened is a scandal. Everybody says we'll be guided by the science, we'll use the science. Well, that seems to be the rule, unless and until you get to ethnic minorities, at which point ethnic politics and sectarianism become way more important than saving lives. I cannot tell you how angry I am.
And thank you for saying that. When I came into political journalism in the mid and late 90s, you were a huge figure. You were absolutely there at the birth of New Labour. You were a black, professional, articulate person. You were Labour's candidate for London Mayor. You were in the London Assembly. And the idea that Labour don't need people like you, to somebody like me who wants a fabulous opposition, a lot of people listen to this podcast know we need a really good, electable, strong Labour Party to make our country work properly. It just seems so... It's student politics, the fact that you are still outside the Labour fold. Why doesn't Keir Starmer just pick up the phone and say, Trevor, hang in there, we're fixing it? Shouldn't he pick up the phone?
Well, you would have to talk to Keir about that. All I would say is there are people in the Labour Party, and unfortunately there may be a majority of the members, who actually don't care that much about whether we are in government or in power. They think the most important thing is to have control over the party machinery, because then they can win resolutions at conferences and tell their friends that they're in charge of the party. Well, that might be great fun, but actually it is absolutely useless to the people that the Labour Party was founded to represent: working class, poor, excluded people, now ethnic minorities. What we as a party are doing is, while we're indulging in fun and games and who gets to be the political education secretary of the local branch, our people are having to go to food banks. Our people are not being given advice as to whether they should shield from COVID because they belong to a particular ethnic group that is vulnerable. Our people are not being represented when it comes to issues of pay and power in their factories. The Labour Party should not be a playground for people who play at politics. If they want to do that, go and do it online. The Labour Party needs to be returned to people who genuinely want to change this country for the better and to create more equal opportunities for the people who vote for us. That's the tragedy at the moment. I mean, I'm just collateral in this particular battle. but it's a much bigger one. I hope that that's a battle that Keir wants to fight. And if it is the one he wants to fight, whether I'm in or out the party, he's always going to have my support on that.
Trevor Phillips, thanks for visiting Planet Normal.
Thank you, Liam. I don't quite know how normal this planet is. I wish actually more of this planet was like yours, but it's been a great visit.
Impressive guy, huh?
Oh, I mean, Trevor Phillips suspended from the Labour Party, Liam. I mean, in a sane world...
God, they need him.
In a sane
God,
world,
they need him.
He'd be leading the Labour Party on Planet Normal.
Should be on the
he?
front bench.
Absolutely.
Should be on the front bench.
Yeah. I mean, he's just... Unfortunately for him, he's been the patron saint of awkward truths, hasn't he? So all this identity politics that Labour has embraced to its detriment, he challenges that. And of course, he challenges it with immense authenticity and power because, he is the guy pulled over by the police, isn't he, in his 50s, humiliated, and he speaks about it so well. I tell you what jumped out at me is a great theme for Planet Normal, really, is he says this is what racism really looks like, is all these well-meaning white media types who, as he said, discovered black people in their 20s who didn't report thoroughly as they would on any other topic on Black Lives Matters, because it was all, we feel your pain, da-di-da. And then, of course, then it all turns out that Black Lives Matters has got some extremely troubling elements, defund the police, extreme left wing, etc. And as Trevor said, now there's an awkward silence. Oh dear, we got it wrong.
We had a really interesting conversation after the recording about how many people we knew in our lives from the Irish community and the black community who had intermarried and sort of stuck together during childhood. That was certainly a huge theme of my life as a young lad in northwest London. And there is a real affinity between the UK's various immigrant communities, certainly among the working classes, Irish, blacks, Jewish. It's a fabulous story, and it's been my experience that it's often people at the bottom end of the income spectrum who are best at rubbing along, just getting on with it and helping each other out as immigrant communities. And that's why it really, really got to me. It really upset me when I saw during the Brexit debate well-meaning media types who know nothing about the ethnic diversity of this country. To them, it's a statistic saying that ordinary British people weren't good at getting along, weren't good at engendering good race relations. Of course, there are some bad apples, but we are... Successive polling evidence shows across the world we are among the most tolerant countries in the world. Not to disregard any of the problems that we have and the fact that we need improvement. And I think it's really important, as Sean Bailey said, that we acknowledge progress, because if you can't acknowledge progress and build on it, then why are we all here? So let's finish with some messages from readers, Planet Normal listeners. How about a bit more Elfin Safety, a key feature of the Planet Normal landscape, Alison?
Liam, we've talked about this, haven't we? I think because we were saying we're going to publish all that My Mad Childhood as a feature in the paper, but I think it's now gone to a book. It's going to be a slim Christmas volume. Because there is, if I'm ever feeling a bit low in the lockdown,
a series of books.
A series of books. They're absolutely amazing. So this is Nick Dickinson. Nick says he feels blessed he was born just after the war, even though it was a time of great austerity, because children always managed to entertain themselves without helicopter parents. And Nick says, when I was about 8 years old, I decided I would build a tank. The chassis was the Silver Cross pram my baby sister still used. I found another old pram, turned it upside down, smashed a hole big enough to put a machine gun through it. I then convinced my 4-year-old brother that it would be amazing for him to be the gunner in the pram tank. I put him in the Silver Cross, placed the old upturned pram on top. I pushed the pram tank down the hill outside our house to see how far it would go. Initially, it held its line before eventually crashing into a garden hedge and throwing my brother out. He was unhurt, quite happy, and next day he agreed to be the tank driver again. Now, this is the best bit. My brother survived, and I'm pleased to say he is not brain damaged, but is now a presenter on the Antiques Roadshow. Mr. Dickinson, absolutely, just marvellous, really. Pram tanks. Those were the days, Liam. Those were the days.
We've got to compile this, Alison. We've got to chronicle this incredible social history. Let's get some more tales of childhood Elfin Safety. I had a really good email from Colin on a slightly different subject. He complains that being pro-Brexit is, as he says, constantly portrayed as being on the right. Yet in the real world, that's not the case. He said he was born in a Labour-supporting working-class home, and during the 50s and 60s, ordinary Labour voters, they backed Attlee and Gateskill. They were patriotic, respecting our history. He later met, he said, Peter Shaw and Tony Benn, those Labour giants who also firmly opposed the idea of a federal Europe. Yet despite all this, says Colin, the media and morons on Twitter say wanting to leave the EU means that you're on the right. It's just nonsense. Amen to that.
Amen to that. He's lucky just to be called to be on the right. Many of us have been called to be on the extreme right.
Absolutely.
Yeah, lovely. Coming back to the NHS scandal, Patricia Bullock said, we did our bit to protect the NHS. However, the NHS has not done its bit to protect the millions who rely on it. Treatment cancelled, referrals ceased, hospitals sitting empty. Disgraceful. Health staff do a great job, undoubtedly, but the NHS is not fit for purpose. It's not in need of useless applause. It's in need of opening up and doing its duty.
You know, Alison, it's like the third rail in British politics, isn't it? You're not allowed to talk about reforming the NHS, restructuring the NHS. I would defend with every breath the idea of free at the point of use healthcare as we have in the UK. I think that's a brilliant principle. But I would also say there are many, many different ways to deliver it. You don't need to have the world's third biggest employer with over 1 million staff,
No.
a big monolithic organisation. And the reality is, even though we have lots of tremendous people working in the NHS, a lot of the outcomes, particularly in terms of cancer and the care of the elderly, our outcomes are pretty low by international standards among the wealthy countries, even though our cutting edge research medicine is very much at the forefront of the world. Some of the outcomes that ordinary people are getting from the NHS, for all the efforts of the staff, are just not good.
Actually, Ric Strange wrote to us and said, when my late father retired from the NHS in 1975, he told me there were 3,500 non-medical people in the service. He said he retired early because of frequent arguments with these people who knew nothing whatsoever about medicine. My dad predicted correctly that this part of the NHS would grow out of all proportion until its personnel outnumbered the essential doctors and nurses. Well, that's from the horse's mouth, Liam, isn't it?
Yeah, the bureaucracy, the multi-headed monster. So there it is. Voyage number 7 to Planet Normal is mission accomplished. If you do want to comment on anything that we've said, anything in the news over the coming days, please do write to us at planetnormal@telegraph.co.uk.
This podcast is free to listen to, and you can do so on the Telegraph website or by subscribing on your podcast app. A lot of people think subscription means pay. No, Liam and I are a very cheap date, particularly now we're going to have restaurant vouchers from Rishi Sunak.
You can get paid to take us out.
You can get paid, exactly. Let's all go out. We'll have a big slap-up meal in London. Yes, confusingly, subscribing to a podcast has got nothing to do with being a subscriber to the Telegraph. It just means the podcast is automatically downloaded to your app every time there's a new episode. So if you'd like to listen to Planet Normal on a smartphone or a tablet and you're not sure how to subscribe to it on an app, there's now an article explaining all things podcast on the Telegraph website. Hooray. And if Alison Pearson has learnt how to do it, trust me, anyone can do it.
Don't forget, if you're still baffled, you can email us at planetnormal@telegraph.co.uk and we'll try to help. And if you're not already a subscriber to the Telegraph itself, as a Planet Normal fan, you can get your first 30 days free, giving you access to all the Telegraph's extensive news service at telegraph.co.uk/normal, and we'll put that link in the show notes too.
And thank you so much again for your positive ratings and reviews. We're so thrilled.
And we read them all, don't we? Good and bad. But they've been mostly good.
Mostly really good. And lots of people saying, a dose of sanity in your week. And, I know we both feel very touched that people feel there are people out there like us. And that's why we started this, isn't it, Liam? So just drop us a line and leave us a rating if you can.
And if you don't know how to leave a rating and review and you want to, again, email us and we'll tell you how. So as we leave Planet Normal, we speed back to our mad, mad world. Thanks as ever to our producer, Louisa Wells. Hooray!
Hooray!
Elliot Lampitt.
Hooray!
Hooray! And our editor, Theo Laludis.
Hooray!
Hooray! Until next Thursday, it's goodbye from me.
And it's goodbye from him.